For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Rafique Gangat discusses his book titled Bending the Rules from Klerk to Mandela, Stories of a Pioneering Diplomat. Welcome, Mr. Gangat.
Thank you.
The book titled Bending the Rules from Klerk to Mandela, Stories of a Pioneering Diplomat entails your unusual career as apartheid South Africa's first black diplomat. How did you land up in such a position?
Well, it's one of the stories in the book that you may have read. I was, it was in the 80s. It was a time when the African National Congress and Afrikaners were already talking. There were talks taking place between Afrikaner intellectuals, academics with Thabo Mbeki, and people in the ANC. And it was a time when behind the scenes there was already discussions taking place. I was at the Leadership Institute in Pretoria, and I met a professor from America, and I spent an evening with him, and an evening that was spent with black people, white people, Indian people, all kinds of people. And he told me, "You'd make an amazing diplomat." And I said, "Really? I don't want to be a diplomat, and they don't want me." And he says, "You South Africans see everything in black and white. Diplomacy is the gray." And he explained to me that he is a Democrat, and if the Republicans are in power, he would serve his country. His country comes first, and government of the day comes second. And to cut a long story short, we wrote a CV, and we sent a CV through, and they called me, and I was no Uncle Tom. They wanted me to go out and defend apartheid, and I said, "Forget it, I don't want it." And then I continued, and I started a career on radio, and I worked on Radio Lotus. And years later, they called me back, and they said, "Yes, we want you." And I said, "Okay, on my terms. My terms, I'm not going to defend apartheid because I'm a victim myself of apartheid laws. And all I can do is I know that change is coming, and the process has started, and I can explain the process because the process is about my country, and I love my country." And that's how, but the book details exactly what happened and how I became a diplomat.
Mr. Gangat became the first career diplomat of color in South Africa, serving as a diplomat under the apartheid government and during administration of South Africa's first democratically elected President Nelson Mandela. So from that information, what differences can you share with us about working under the National Party and African National Congress administrations?
Big difference. During the Nelson Mandela era, it was an amazing era. It was an era of hope. It was an era of change. It was what we all struggled for and what we all fought for. And there was so much of excitement, and we had this amazing leader. I was very fortunate to have met Nelson Mandela when I was served as ambassador in Abu Dhabi. And I have a whole chapter where he helped me to give up smoking. Right? And it's an interesting chapter. I had this walk with him in the morning, and it was an exciting time. But since then, things have fallen apart. The reason why things have fallen apart is that I think we in South Africa, we've confused state and government. We've confused the two. Everywhere in the world, the civil service remains constant. Governments come and governments go. What the ANC has done with all the cadre deployments, people have been placed into positions where they're not qualified for the positions. In the old setup, we had diplomats who were extremely qualified. Maybe the politics was wrong, but the diplomats were very qualified. Today the politics are right, but the diplomats are not qualified. We have all these stories, like the most recently we had this one lady who was ambassador in Singapore. She was a convicted drug dealer, and it became a big story in the country, and this is bad for the country. What happened during the Nelson Mandela era was qualified, the right people were sent, regardless of you being black, white, colored, or Indian. You were qualified, you're the right person for the place, you're a South African. Now it's all about, you got to belong to the ANC, you got to be part of the cadres, appointed by the president. That's the problem.
Do you regret having represented the apartheid government? It was a regime that was widely recognized as having perpetuated a crime against humanity.
I didn't represent the apartheid government per se. I came at a time when the apartheid government was changing. And for me, it was an interesting time because the question I asked at that stage, on the one hand, you had the anti-apartheid movement and the ANC. They wanted to destroy this whole house that apartheid built. Fine. The apartheid government, yes, they built this house with walls separating all the different races. But what they wanted to do was remove the walls but keep the house. And that was their challenge. On the other hand, bring the house down. Me as a South African, my issue was, if the house comes down, what happens before we build another house? To the people of South Africa. In the end, what really happened was Nelson Mandela accepted a government of national unity. Although the ANC won the elections, we had a government of national unity where he brought everybody together and he kept the house with the walls removed, and we built from there.
You say that you fought against apartheid laws in your own way, because I don't remember you being affiliated in any of the parties.
No.
Can you give us some examples of how you did it, and do you think that you were effective?
Yes, I mean, none of the political parties grabbed me. Because, for example, I mean, in my book, I talk about one story where one person who's today ANC, you know, he was a minister, he's a member of parliament. He was of my generation, where he was recruiting, and I went to his house. And talk is cheap. I spoke to his domestic, because I spoke, you know, Zulu fluently, and I was shocked with the conditions she was living under. For me, it all begins in your home. The home I grew up in, I grew up with African people, with Zulu-speaking people. My mom went to a Zulu school. My grandfather translated the Bible from English to Zulu. And for me, that was far more important than political rhetoric. Political rhetoric is one story, but reality is a different story. In my own little way, yes, during university, while the rights were carrying on for better education, I used to go to Sabantu and I used to teach students English, I mean black students, and I used to teach in English and Zulu. I used to teach them Macbeth. And in my way, it was doing something positive. In terms of apartheid laws, I mean, personally, what I really did was I bent the rules. I didn't break the laws, but I knew how to bend and play with the rules. That's what the book's about.
Yeah. You were also involved in a few of the interracial relationships which contravened with the Apartheid Immorality Act. How did you navigate around those situations?
Oh, it was very difficult. I mean, but no, I mean, we navigated this. There was a subculture in Hillbrow at the time. I had this amazing black woman, and I write this story about her. Her name was Audrey, and she had a white lover, and I had a white lover, and we would go out, and it was simple. When the police came along, I'm with Audrey, and Anne was with Walter. You know, there were ways to navigate this. We bent the rules, we broke the rules, but you can't stop people from falling in love with who they want to fall in love with.
Can you tell us more about the blatant racism that you experienced when you first landed in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I landed at the airport, and it was very strange. You know, coming from South Africa, this was in the late 80s. It was, I mean, towards the end of apartheid. And you land in what is supposed to be America, the land of the free, the land of the brave. And the people at customs referred to us as darkies. You know, growing up in South Africa, nobody referred to me as a darkie. You know, okay, they referred to me as a coolie, but not a darkie. And I was referred to as a darkie, and I was shocked. You know, and since then, in living in America, yes, a lot of racism I experienced in America. America is still, even till today, grappling with the issue of race.
What were your duties in your first diplomatic position in LA?
I was the vice consul, and my duties were I represented South Africa on the 12 West Coast states, and it was more media and information. I would go to all the radio, TV stations on the West Coast, talk at the universities, and it was basically explaining a process that had started. You see, our process, Americans wanted an event, the end of apartheid and freedom. What happened in South Africa was a process, and Americans wanted a revolution. And part of my duties, I would explain to Americans that no, we South Africans will solve our problems ourselves. We would eventually get to a table, and we would talk, and we would peacefully solve the problem. And that's what we did. I have documentary proof that I was talking about this way before it actually happened.
So you were a keen cricketer as well, but can you tell us about the challenges that you experienced? Because there were a bit of issues because of the colour and some
Exactly.
of
Cricket was a big story, and there's a lot of stories about cricket in my book. In apartheid South Africa, white cricket was separated from non-white cricket, and the struggle was, there was this boycott of the anti-apartheid movement across the world, boycotted South African sports people from playing abroad. Then there was some movement within the country where they started multinational cricket, where for the first time I as an Indian could bowl to a white man on a white field. And it was an historic occasion in Pinetown where I bowled to South African Test cricketer Tick Smith. And I came along. It was the first time we as Indians could bowl on a grass wicket. We played on grounds that didn't even have grass, and we had matting wickets. And the first ball I bowled to him hit me for a 4. And my captain runs up to me and he tells me, that was terrible what you bowled. And I said, I've never bowled on grass, although I smoked it. Right. But we learned pretty fast, and I think in that over I got him out. It was a transition. But then there was an incident that happened to me at the Wonders Cricket Ground, where although we were now allowed to play cricket with the white race, but the Separate Amenities Act was still on the statute books, which meant that although I could go to the Wonders Cricket Ground and I could sit wherever I wanted to sit, but I couldn't buy any drinks because the liquor laws were still on the statute books. And an incident took place there, and I quit cricket. And that was because I believe that you cannot play normal sport in an abnormal society. We have to normalize society and that was the next part of the struggle.
You also had a belief that music could transcend racial boundaries. What role do you think music can play now in uniting people?
It played an amazing role then. After I graduated from university in Pietermaritzburg, I came and I worked in Johannesburg, and we were using music. It was a time of Juluka as well. Juluka, and it was an amazing time where we could use music and bring people together. Bands were mixing up, sounds were mixing up, audiences were mixing up, and it was an amazing period. But the problem, eventually I quit the music business, was that on the one hand I was trying to use music to bring people together, the others around me were using that mantra to make money. And I think, I wasn't that much of a capitalist at the time, so I walked out. But yes, music can play a role, and music has played a role around the world by bringing people together.
Upon your return to the country at the end of the 80s, you were entrusted with a task of facilitating the return of South African Muslim pilgrims stranded due to the outbreak of the First Gulf War. Tell us about how you felt when you realized that you had a big task at hand.
Wow, that was quite a challenge. Okay, I was young and I was full of myself. Today you tell me to do the same thing, I might have second thoughts. This is the brashness of youth, as we say. I landed back into the country. The Gulf War broke out. There were about 300 South African Muslims stranded in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis had closed off the airport. They were using the airport, the Americans were using it to bomb Iraq. And we had never done an evacuation of our nationals in our history. And to do an evacuation of our nationals from a country with which we have no diplomatic relations is mission impossible. All the diplomats in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs laughed. This kid has just come back from the States and he wants to do mission impossible. I proved them all wrong. I did it single-handedly. I went into Saudi Arabia, and that's a whole chapter in the book of how I pulled that off and brought them all back home. And it was quite a challenging task. A lot of hard work, a lot of bending of some rules, and in the end it worked out.
You are no longer living in South Africa. What do you think of how our country has developed since the fall of apartheid, and what further challenges do you think our country faces?
It's a question I'm asked all the time. I landed the other day at the airport, and the taxi driver asked me, where you going to go to? And then he heard the accent and realized I'm not foreign, I'm South African. And I told him where I want to go to, and I said, I am South African, I used to live here, but I don't live here anymore. And he said, where do you live? And I said, I live in Jerusalem. He says, please pray for our country. And that's the problem. But what I'm impressed about is people are confronting it. Yes, in the past, in my life, I bent the rules through the apartheid system, and then I became a diplomat. Today, what we have a government that's breaking the rules, left, right, and center, and blaming apartheid as a moral justification for breaking the rules, and that's wrong. And I think, but the positive thing is South Africans are beginning to question that, because we love our democracy, we love our freedoms, we have it, they cannot be abused. Even the president and all elected officials are answerable, because in the end, what we achieved in the end, and what I think I achieved with my life, we didn't vote for an ANC government or this government, we voted for a constitution. In the end, the constitution is far more supreme than any government, because governments can come and governments can go. Tomorrow we can have maybe some other government, and the next day we can have another government. But what we as South Africans should uphold, and I think all of us should do it, is that constitution.
Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
That was Rafique Gangat speaking to Crema Media's Polity about his book titled Bending the Rules, From Klerk to Mandela, Stories of a Pioneering Diplomat.